Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We live in a society where exhaustion just feels like the absolute default setting for almost everyone.
Oh, without a doubt, it is everywhere.
Right. I want you to picture yourself running on a treadmill at the gym. But this is not just your normal Tuesday morning workout. The speed keeps creeping up fraction by fraction, and the incline keeps getting steeper.
That sounds miserable already.
It is. And the entire time you are running, you are holding a full glass of water, trying desperately not to spill a single drop. Meanwhile, the digital display right in front of your face keeps flashing these really aggressive messages.
Telling you that you are falling behind, I assume.
Yeah, telling you that you need to run faster, you need to build more, achieve more, and you somehow need to leave a permanent, indestructible mark on the gym floor before your time is up.
That is a highly stressful mental image. But honestly, it is incredibly accurate to how most people wake up and operate every single day.
It is a relentless, breathless way to exist. And if you have ever felt that specific modern brand of exhaustion, that feeling that you are constantly striving but never actually arriving, well, the ancient text we are looking at today offers a perspective that is initially shocking but actually highly comforting.
It really flips the script on how we view our daily grind.
It totally does. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a stack of really fascinating sources. Our mission is to analyze the opening verses of the book of Ecclesiastes, specifically chapter 1, verses 1 through 11.
Which is a heavy section of scripture.
Very heavy. And we are doing this through the lens of two very robust theological source texts that we have sitting on the table today. One is called Breath, Not Vanity, and the other is The Merest of Breaths.
And just a quick heads up as we jump in. Our goal today is not to preach or take sides. The authors of the texts we are analyzing argue very strongly against modern secular interpretations of Ecclesiastes.
Right. They do not pull any punches.
They really do not. They also launch some heavy critiques at a few modern theological frameworks. So as we map out this material, I will be clearly stating the specific arguments and claims made by the authors of these source texts. We are just reporting on their conclusions to help you understand their specific perspective.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really have to start with what might be the greatest linguistic misunderstanding in biblical history.
It is a big one.
Yeah, we are looking at how a single, completely misunderstood word has entirely skewed the perception of this book for generations. When most people hear the word Ecclesiastes, they immediately think of the word meaningless.
What do they think of the word vanity?
Yes. They assume it is this dark, depressing, cynical book written by someone who has just given up on life.
Well, what is fascinating here is the translation history of a single Hebrew word, which is hevel. This specific word appears 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes.
38 times is a lot for one book.
It is. To put that into perspective for you, that is roughly half of all the occurrences of that word in the entire Old Testament. The author, who identifies as the preacher, is using this word as the absolute center of gravity for his entire argument. Everything revolves around hevel.
But over the centuries, the translation of this word took a very specific trajectory, right?
Yes, a trajectory that the sources argue led us far away from the original intent.
I want to trace that trajectory because words shape worldviews. How did we get from the original ancient Hebrew to the English Bibles sitting on our desks today?
It's basically a long game of telephone. It started a couple of centuries before Christ with the Greek Septuagint. The Septuagint was the translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek, primarily for Greek-speaking Jewish people living in places like Alexandria.
Right, so they needed an equivalent word.
Yeah, when those scholars translated the Hebrew text into Greek, they needed a word for hevel, so they chose the Greek word matiets.
And what kind of baggage does that Greek word carry? Because words always bring their cultural baggage with them.
A lot of philosophical baggage. Matiotes carries a strong connotation of purposelessness, absurdity, or emptiness. It brings in a distinctly Greek philosophical lens that assumes the physical world is somewhat deficient or absurd.
So it immediately makes the text sound a bit more pessimistic.
Precisely. Then, fast forward a few hundred years, Jerome comes along. He is sitting in a cave in Bethlehem, translating the Greek into Latin to create the Vulgate. When he hits that Greek word, he uses the Latin word vanitas.
Which obviously gives us the English word vanity.
Spot on. And in modern English, vanity suggests conceit. It makes you think of someone staring at themselves in a mirror for too long, having an inflated sense of self.
Like it is a moral failing of arrogance.
Yeah. But the translation issue did not stop there. It evolved into modern English translations. For instance, the very popular New International Version, the NIV, uses the word meaningless. So it reads, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless.
The sources we're looking at argue that this translation choice is a massive mistake. They argue it falsely imports a 20th century existential nihilism into an ancient, God-centered text.
Right.
It makes the preacher sound like Jean-Paul Sartre.
Yes, the French philosopher.
Yeah.
Existential nihilism is the idea that the universe is just a cold, blank void.
Right, the whole life has no meaning angle.
Exactly that. It suggests that existence precedes essence, meaning there is no inherent purpose to anything, and we are just absurd creatures screaming into a black hole. Sartre would sit in a Parisian cafe smoking cigarettes, declaring that life is an absurd, purposeless void.
That is a very bleak picture.
It is. The authors of our sources are absolutely adamant that we should not baptize the philosophy of Sartre into the biblical canon. Ecclesiastes is not nihilism.
Right, because nihilism says there is no God and no purpose, but the author of Ecclesiastes constantly references God. So if the word does not mean meaningless and it does not mean conceited vanity, what is the actual literal definition of hevel?
Let's break it down for someone who has never studied Hebrew. The literal physical meaning of hevel is a breath, a puff of air, a mist, or a vapor. That's it.
Just a physical mist.
Just a physical phenomenon. To fully grasp why the author uses this physical image, you have to contrast it with another central Hebrew concept, which is kavod.
Okay, what does kavod mean?
Kavod translates to weight, substance, and glory. It is heavy. It is solid. In the Hebrew mindset, kavod is used to describe the character and presence of God. God is infinite weight. He is absolute, unmoving reality.
That physical imagery is so incredibly vivid. You can literally feel the difference in your hands between holding a heavy, solid stone and trying to hold a puff of smoke.
Yes. And the authors point out that in the ancient Near East, false idols were very often described by the prophets as hevel.
Oh, because they're just empty statues.
Because they were weightless. They were
Yeah.
insubstantial. They lacked any real gravity or reality compared to the living God. They were just vapor.
And there are scriptural parallels that back this physical definition up throughout the rest of the Bible, right?
Absolutely. Think back to the book of Genesis chapter 4. We have the story of Cain and Abel. The name of the first murder victim in human history is Abel.
Wow, okay.
In Hebrew, his name is literally Hevel. His very name perfectly depicts a life that was brutally, tragically cut short. He was a breath that vanished almost as soon as he appeared.
That is chilling when you think about it.
It really is. The New Testament picks up this exact same physical imagery too. James chapter 4, verse 14 asks the reader, "What is your life?" And the answer uses the Greek word atmos, which translates to mist or smoke to describe human life. It says you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes.
I hear the linguistic argument, and it is solid, but I want to push back on this for a second. Let's say I am the listener. I am driving in my car, hearing this, and thinking, okay, so my life isn't a meaningless black void. It is just a fleeting, vanishing mist.
Still sounds pretty depressing, doesn't it?
Exactly. Doesn't that still lead to absolute despair? If I try to catch a mist in a glass jar, I just end up with wet hands and a massive amount of frustration. How is calling my life a breath any better or more comforting than calling it meaningless?
That is a very natural reaction. But the sources make a crucial distinction here. A breath is real. A breath is made by God. And a breath is entirely necessary for life to exist.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, a mist is a real physical state that can water the ground and provide relief. The text is not claiming that God's physical creation is worthless or absurd or bad. It is claiming that it is completely impossible to master.
You cannot put a mist in a jar.
You cannot put a padlock on a breath to keep it forever. It will always slip away.
It slips right through your fingers.
Right. When the preacher calls life hevel, he's describing life in a fallen world as brief, elusive, and impossible to control. He's not saying the world lacks inherent value. He is saying the physical world lacks permanence. It will not hold still.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So the intense frustration we feel every day comes from our attempt to grab the mist and freeze it, not from the mist itself being bad.
Spot on.
We are demanding that the vapor act like solid concrete, and when it inevitably evaporates, we get angry and exhausted. We are building a brick wall on top of a fog bank.
That is a great way to visualize it. Building a brick wall on a fog bank will exhaust you and eventually collapse. The ache we feel when things change or fade is not accidental.
So the sources say that ache has a purpose.
Yes. The authors of our sources point out that it is actually divine mercy when God allows us to feel the limits we constantly try to deny. We waste our precious breath when we frantically chase applause, possessions, or control, acting as though the mist could be stuffed into a safe and locked away.
So if our personal empires are just fog banks washing away, human nature dictates we will look for a loophole. But the author of Ecclesiastes shuts down every loophole using grammar.
He really locks the door on us.
He does. Now that we know what the word hevel means, we need to look at how the author stacks these words together to create this crushing linguistic weight right at the beginning of the book.
The grammatical architecture of verse 2 is devastating in its absolute focus. The Hebrew syntax uses something called a construct chain. The phrase is hevel hebelim. This is the primary way biblical Hebrew expresses this superlative degree.
Stop there for a second. Explain what a superlative degree is for someone who has forgotten their high school English classes.
Sure, a superlative is the highest degree of equality. In English, we use words that end in est, biggest, greatest,
Yeah.
highest.
But ancient Hebrew does not have those est suffixes, do they?
No, they do not.
Yeah.
Instead of adding a suffix, Hebrew grammar multiplies the noun to express the ultimate version of that thing.
Give me an example of that from somewhere else in the text.
Well, for example, when describing the most sacred, restricted place in the entire temple, the text calls it the Holy of Holies, or Kodesh HaKodashim. When describing the ultimate supreme sovereign, it uses the phrase King of Kings, or Melech Melechim. The highest song ever written is the Song of Songs.
So when the preacher opens his book by saying Hebel Hebelam, he is signifying the absolute, ultimate, highest possible degree of transience.
100%. It translates to the merest of breaths, the vapor of vapors, the most fleeting mist imaginable.
And the discourse analysis of this verse, how the sentence is actually constructed, shows how incredibly deliberate this is. The author states the phrase vapor of vapors, then he interrupts himself with an identifying formula saying, says the preacher, and then he repeats the exact same phrase again. Vapor of vapors.
In Hebrew discourse, that kind of emphatic, repetitive structure is highly intentional. It functions like taking a red pen, bolding the text, italicizing it, and underlining it all at the same time.
You cannot miss it.
No, it forces the reader to stop their momentum and give absolute focus to the claim being made. It is not just a casual observation. It is a definitive, unyielding thesis statement.
And then the hammer actually drops at the end of the verse. The author reveals the universal scope of this vapor.
The concluding clause in Hebrew is hakel hebel. The whole is breath. The author deliberately suspends the subject, the word everything, until the very end of the sentence.
Oh, for dramatic effect.
Yeah, he builds this massive crescendo of superlative transience, interrupts it to verify his authority to speak on the matter, repeats the superlative, and then drops a subject onto the table, everything.
I want you, the listener, to really pause and consider what falls under that umbrella word, everything. Because it is very easy to look at the trivial things in life and agree. You watch a silly 30-second video on your phone and you say, sure, that video was a vapor. It meant nothing.
Right, that is the easy stuff to let go of.
But the text says everything. That includes your meticulously crafted 5-year career plan that you stress over at 2 a.m. That includes the 30-year mortgage you just signed on your house. It includes your anxieties about tomorrow, your stock portfolio, your reputation at the office, and the way your neighbors view your lawn. Every single bit of it falls under the category of vapor.
The syntax leaves absolutely zero room for exemptions. The sources stress that this comprehensive reality must dictate how we view our entire existence on this earth. We love to carve out little safe zones.
We really do. We think we are the exception.
We look at our specific achievements and pretend they possess eternal weight. We think, maybe someone else's career is a vapor, but my company is different. The text does not allow for that illusion.
Now, to prove that absolutely everything is a vapor, the text does not just rely on clever grammar, it sets up an experiment. And not just any experiment, but an inquiry using a human test subject who had access to every conceivable earthly advantage.
The historical context is absolutely vital for understanding the weight of this argument. In verse 1, the author identifies himself as the son of David, king in Jerusalem. We're talking about Solomon.
King Solomon himself.
Yes. And from a historical framework, Solomon's reign represents the absolute peak, the zenith of theocratic Israel's earthly prosperity, peace, and power.
We need to paint a picture of what that actually means. Because he wasn't just a guy with a nice house in the suburbs who had his car paid off.
Far from it. Solomon possessed a level of wealth that is difficult for us to comprehend. He had massive diplomatic dominance over all the surrounding nations. The historical accounts describe his trading ships bringing back gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks.
Apes and peacocks, that is just wealth for the sake of wealth.
Exactly. He engaged in staggering public works. He built the massive temple, utilizing imported cedar wood from Lebanon. He had vast gardens, pools of water, and entire choirs of singers dedicated just to his entertainment.
He had everything money could possibly buy.
And on top of that material wealth, he possessed supreme intellectual acumen. He understood botany, zoology, and literature. He had access to every single form of pleasure, learning, and civic authority available in the ancient world.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This historical setup turns the entire book into a massive, undeniable experiment. Think about it. If a guy living paycheck to paycheck in a regular neighborhood says, money can't buy happiness, you might nod politely, but secretly you are thinking, well, you just didn't have enough money. If I had $10 million, I could absolutely figure it out. I would be happy.
Right. There is always that lingering, cynical thought that the critic is just speaking from the margins of society. The poor man critiques wealth because he lacks it.
Exactly.
But this critique comes from the absolute summit of human advantage. The sources point out that this is an experiment no poor person could possibly afford to run, and no honest rich person can ever escape. Solomon had the maximum capacity to extract permanent satisfaction from life under the sun. He did not lack funding. He did not lack time. He did not lack access.
And his final conclusion, written down for us, was that even at that unbelievable peak, it was still a vapor. If Solomon, with his gold shields and infinite resources, could not find a permanent anchor in all of that, what chance does a regular person with a standard mortgage and a basic resume have?
None. Zero chance. And that is exactly the point the author is making. The historical backdrop strips away our misplaced confidence in human utopias or societal perfection.
We always think we can build a better system.
We constantly think that if we just elect the right politician, or pass the right economic policy, or invent the right technology, we will fix the human condition. Solomon demonstrates the ultimate failure of earthly kingship and human systems, even when the conditions are completely historically ideal.
I want to talk about how this fits into the rest of the Bible's teaching on wisdom, because if you read the book of Proverbs, which Solomon is also associated with, it seems to suggest a very neat, orderly, predictable world. You work hard, you prosper, you act foolishly, you suffer, A equals B.
The sources highlight the highly specific role Ecclesiastes plays within Israel's broader wisdom tradition. Proverbs provides the general, normative rules for living in God's ordered world. It is the baseline.
Right, the general principles.
Diligence generally profits you. Laziness generally impoverishes you. Honesty builds trust. But Ecclesiastes steps in to document the agonizing exceptions to those rules. It documents life in a fallen, cursed world.
It is the glitch in the matrix, the realities of living east of Eden.
Yes. Ecclesiastes takes a hard look at the frustrations, the sudden reversals, and the delays of justice. It observes that sometimes, despite doing everything right, the righteous suffer terribly. Sometimes the absolute fool prospers for a long, comfortable season.
Which is incredibly frustrating to watch.
It is. Sometimes a person works incredibly hard their entire life, builds a great estate, only to die suddenly and leave their entire inheritance to someone who is reckless and lazy, who squanders it all. Ecclesiastes teaches people how to remain reverent and trust the Lord when life entirely refuses to fit into neat, predictable bumper sticker slogans.
So, from the king sitting in his massive palace, surrounded by imported ivory and gold, looking at the summit of human achievement, the camera suddenly pans out. The preacher turns his gaze to the natural world. He wants to contrast our short, anxious little lives with the massive turning wheels of creation.
In verses 4 through 7, the text shifts into intense poetic imagery to describe the meteorological and hydrological repetitions of the earth. The language the author uses is completely relentless.
Give us a feel for that language.
A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and it constantly hastens back to the place where it rises. The wind travels south, travels north, circling and circling in its circuits. All the streams constantly run into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again.
It honestly sounds exhausting just reading it out loud. It is perpetual motion without any final destination, just spinning wheels.
And the theological meaning behind this imagery is massive. The sources describe these cycles as preaching a sermon without using any words. These are not just ancient scientific observations about how evaporation works or how trade winds operate.
They are pointing to something much bigger.
They are experiential wisdom. They are showing us visually and experientially every time we step outside that human beings cannot master history. The physical world is vastly older than our plans, and it will effortlessly outlast our greatest projects. We enter the stage, we speak our lines, we exit the stage, and the creation simply continues its appointed patterns without missing a beat.
I hear that, but I want to challenge this from a modern perspective, because the listener is thinking about their smartphone right now. We live in an era of massive, unprecedented technological control. The ancient author of Ecclesiastes was looking at a rushing river and saying, I can't control that.
Sure, we have changed the landscape.
We have. Today, we build massive concrete dams. We generate electricity from those rivers. We use satellites in space to forecast those wind circuits weeks in advance. We fly in pressurized metal tubes 30,000 feet above the clouds. We have air conditioning to defeat the heat of the sun. Does this modern mastery of the physical world poke a hole in the ancient author's argument? Have we finally outsmarted the vapor?
The sources address this exact question head-on, and their stance is unequivocally no. Technology does not change the fundamental human condition. It simply changes the costumes we wear while we act it out on stage.
So the plot of the play is exactly the same.
Yes, we can light up our major cities so they shine like daylight at midnight, but we cannot command the sun to actually freeze in the sky. We can use a supercomputer to forecast a Category 5 hurricane, but all the scientists in the world cannot stop that wind from blowing and destroying houses.
That is a very humbling reality check.
And most crucially, all the technological medical mastery in the world cannot pause our own cellular aging. You can take all the supplements you want, you can use the best anti-aging serums, but the vapor still claims you.
So the creation is still humbling us, even if we have better gadgets while it happens?
Always. The relentless repetitions of nature remind us that we are just brief, passing episodes within a much larger, divinely ordered system. Human pride constantly tells us that history basically started the day we were born, and the world will surely collapse the day we die.
It is that main character syndrome we all have.
Yeah, but the sun rose millions of times before you took your very first breath, and it will continue to rise after you are buried. The creation obeys its appointed rhythms, and we are forced, whether we like it or not, to learn our creaturely place.
Because we look at nature and realize we cannot control the wind, the sun, or the rivers, human nature pivots. We turn our gaze inward. We try to find permanence in our own personal experiences, our internal appetites, and our historical legacies. The logic is, if I cannot control the massive world outside my window, I will tightly control the world inside my head.
And verses 8 through 10 completely dismantle that internal illusion as well. The text states that all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, and the ear is not filled with hearing.
This specific point might be the most intensely relevant part of the entire text for someone living right now. The sources specifically connect this restless human appetite to our current digital age.
What is really striking here is how our modern era literally monetizes this exact dissatisfaction described in verse 8. Think about how smartphones and social media algorithms are engineered.
They are engineered to keep you scrolling.
Every screen we interact with is designed to train the user to believe that the very next image, the next short video clip, the next red notification badge, or the next online purchase will finally fill the void in the soul.
It is the ultimate, literal expression of the eye never being satisfied. You pull down to refresh the feed, and it operates just like a slot machine in Vegas. You scroll and you scroll and you scroll, looking for the one post, the one news article, or the one viral video that will make you feel complete or informed enough to stop.
But the feed is endless by algorithmic design.
It is built to ensure your eye is never satisfied.
Absolutely. The soul's hunger is far deeper than any digital stimulus can reach. The preacher observes that our desire constantly outruns our acquisition. We consume sights and sounds without any rest because we were made for something far greater than created stimuli. And the text points out the tragic lack of true novelty in all this striving. Verse 9 says, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there's nothing new under the sun."
That phrase, "nothing new under the sun," is so famous, but it requires some clarification.
Yes, this does not mean there are no new technological inventions. Obviously, Solomon did not have microchips, airplanes, or penicillin. It means there is no novelty at the core level of human nature.
We are still the same creatures.
We are. The exact same sins, The same political ambitions, the same lusts, the same greed, and the same pride simply repeat themselves in new technological packaging. A Twitter mob functioning on digital outrage is driven by the exact same human pride and tribalism as an ancient mob with pitchforks. The technology is new, but the human heart is exactly the same.
And when our internal appetites fail to give us a sense of solid permanence, we try to build an external legacy. We want to be remembered. We want our name to echo in eternity. But verse 11 hits like a ton of bricks. It says, "There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." This strikes right at the heart of our major defense mechanism against death.
We have a desperate, ingrained human desire to build personal brands, to curate our legacies, to get our names stamped into concrete on the sides of hospital wings or university libraries. The sources argue we do this because we inherently sense that being entirely forgotten by history is akin to dying a second time.
We want to leave a mark that the vapor cannot erase.
It reminds me of watching someone build an incredibly intricate sandcastle at the beach during low tide. They spend 4 hours getting the towers perfect. They dig a moat, they smooth the walls, they add little shell decorations. It looks magnificent for an hour.
But the ocean of time is always coming in.
And the tide will inevitably, systematically wash it completely flat. By the next morning, the beach will look identically as it did before they even started.
That is a highly accurate representation of the text's warning. The preacher is exposing the sheer folly of seeking immortality through human remembrance. Think about it practically. Do you know the first and last name of your great-great-grandfather? Do you know what his primary career anxiety was? Most people who seemed entirely indispensable to their specific generation, people who were famous and powerful, are entirely unknown just a few generations later.
1,000 human admirers cannot confer eternal life. The passage strips away the illusion of historical legacy to ask a much sharper question. If human labor, internal appetite, technological novelty, and historical memory all fail to provide lasting gain, where are we supposed to look?
Which brings us to the theological clashes. This is where the rubber meets the road. Having systematically stripped away natural permanence, experiential permanence, and historical legacy, the sources we're using turn their critique toward modern theological systems. Specifically, systems that attempt to bypass this harsh reality and offer people a theological loophole.
And here, we must be very precise in outlining the critiques launched by the source texts. The authors of these materials come from a specific theological angle, and they argue strongly against specific modern viewpoints that they believe offer false comfort to people living under the sun.
Let's map out those targets of critique, as presented by the authors. We're just looking at the mechanics of why these sources attack these specific ideas. The first major target is the prosperity gospel.
According to the source texts, the prosperity gospel, often known as the health and wealth gospel, or name it and claim it theology, is labeled a dangerous lie. It promises perpetual physical health, financial wealth, and earthly success to those who demonstrate enough faith or speak the right positive words.
And how does Ecclesiastes challenge that?
The authors argue that this theology is fundamentally shattered by the book of Ecclesiastes. Why? Because faith does not immunize anyone from the fog of life. A faithful believer's life is just as much a passing vapor as an unbeliever's life. A devout Christian gets cancer just like an atheist gets cancer. The texts argue that promising earthly permanence and guaranteed prosperity is deeply unbiblical because it denies the reality of the vapor.
The second target the sources critique is Arminianism. Now, we need to break that down because that is a heavy seminary word. What are the mechanics of this critique?
Arminianism, in broad terms, is a theological framework that places a heavy focus on human free will and human autonomy in matters of salvation and daily life. The texts critique the idea that the primary locus of control in the universe resides in human choice.
So it puts too much weight on our own shoulders.
The sources argue that this perspective places far too much confidence in human capability. The author of Ecclesiastes frequently pairs the word hevel with the phrase striving after the wind. The authors of our sources use this to demonstrate the absolute impossibility of shepherding the unpredictable circumstances of life through human will. You cannot control the wind, and you cannot dictate your own destiny through sheer willpower.
So if you believe you are the captain of your own soul, Ecclesiastes comes along and shows you that your ship is sinking, the wind is tearing your sails apart, and you are not actually steering anything.
Precisely. The critique is that focusing on human autonomy gives a false sense of control in a world that is dictated by divine providence, not human choice.
And the third major critique from the sources is aimed at seeker-sensitive pragmatism. Let's unpack how that model actually functions and why the authors take issue with it.
Pragmatic, seeker-sensitive approaches to church often design their entire model around making the unchurched person feel as comfortable as possible. The authors of our sources claim that these models deliberately avoid the sobering, heavy realities of human mortality.
How do they do that practically? What does that look like on a Sunday morning?
By removing traditional symbols of mortality, like crosses, from the sanctuary. By removing clocks so time feels suspended. By using upbeat concert lighting and only preaching positive, therapeutic messages about self-improvement.
So it is more of a motivational seminar.
The critique claims that these models seek to entertain people rather than preparing them for the unavoidable reality of death. The sources argue that skipping over the hard, dark truths of Ecclesiastes to maintain a positive, upbeat atmosphere leaves people entirely unequipped for the actual tragedies of life under the sun.
When someone in that church gets a terminal diagnosis, a sermon about 5 steps to a better you is completely useless.
It absolutely is.
So, if those three systems, the prosperity gospel, hyper-focus on human will, and seeker-sensitive entertainment are flawed according to the authors, what is the alternative offered by these source texts?
The texts advocate for an absolute, unflinching reliance on God's meticulous providence.
Because trying to wrestle control away from God's sovereign decree is like trying to catch a hurricane in a butterfly net. You just cannot do it, and you will destroy your own peace of mind trial.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these theological critiques presented by the authors essentially boil down to identifying the exact same root issue: the sin of pretending to be permanent.
That is a great way to summarize it.
Whether it is assuming you can decree your own financial wealth, assuming your free will dictates human history, or avoiding the topic of death to stay comfortable in a padded seat, the core error is demanding a level of control and permanence that belongs exclusively to God. It is the creature trying to steal the attributes of the Creator.
If human striving cannot fix the vapor, if the greatest human king with all his gold couldn't fix it, and if our clever modern theological systems cannot bypass it, where does the solution actually come from? It logically cannot come from under the sun. It has to come from outside the closed system of this physical world.
This is where the sources point toward the Christological fulfillment of the text. Ecclesiastes does an incredibly painful, thorough job of exposing a massive human need that no earthly wisdom can cure. The solution requires the incarnation.
I want to look at that transition, because we leave the Old Testament with this heavy fog hanging over everything. How does the New Testament answer the despair of Ecclesiastes?
The sources describe it beautifully. The eternal Word, the second person of the Trinity, who possesses infinite weight and reality, that solid kavod we discussed earlier, voluntarily steps down into the vapor, the hevel. God did not save breath-like creatures by remaining distant from their breath. He subjected himself to life under the sun.
He entered the exact same frustrating, cursed spinning system that Solomon was complaining about. He felt the heat of the sun, he felt the wind, he felt the exhaustion.
Yes. The text highlights that Christ experienced the shifting winds of providence. He experienced profound, or rather severe, structural injustice. He experienced weariness, sweat, tears, and in the end, physical death. But unlike us, his labor was not a futile striving after wind. The sources detail how Christ dealt with the curse through a concept called penal substitutionary atonement.
Let's break that phrase down, penal substitutionary atonement. Explain the mechanics of that like I'm 5 years old, because it is a massive theological term.
To break that down, imagine the sheer weight, the kavod of God's eternal perfect justice coming down against human rebellion. Penal refers to the penalty for that rebellion. Substitutionary means someone else takes the hit in your place.
So Jesus stands in the gap.
Jesus steps into our vaporous, fleeting existence and acts like a divine lightning rod. He absorbs that cosmic penalty, that infinite weight of wrath on the cross, so that we do not have to bear it. The solid reality of God took on the curse of the vapor.
And the bodily resurrection is the definitive physical answer to the vapor.
The resurrection shatters the finality of hevel.
Explain the mechanics of how a resurrection fixes a vaporous world.
Because a physical body walking out of a stone grave introduces literal, indestructible permanence back into a world of decay. Death is the ultimate vapor. It erases everything. But because Christ conquered the grave and rose in indestructible physical life, death is no longer the final word.
It changes the whole equation.
The sources argue that human labor under the sun cannot create eternal profit on its own. But labor done in union with the physically risen Christ is gathered up into God's eternal purpose. The vapor does not have the last laugh. Permanence has invaded the mist.
The sources also include an explicit note here about the future. They do not just stop at the resurrection, they look forward.
Yes, the texts explicitly note a premillennial view of the end times.
Meaning what for the listener?
Meaning they point toward a literal physical return of Christ to the earth in the future. The argument the authors make is that the true and lasting kingdom of peace will not be achieved by human political efforts, or by passing better laws, or by building better technology.
We cannot build our own utopia.
No, it will only happen by Christ physically returning to establish a kingdom of true justice. This culminates in a new earth, and on that new earth, there is no more curse, no more futility, and absolutely no more vapor. The permanence we so desperately crave right now, the permanence we try to build with our 401ks and our sandcastles, will finally be realized, but only through Christ's future reign.
So what does this all mean? We have covered a massive amount of theological ground today. We have gone from ancient Hebrew translation history in Alexandria to Solomon's massive wealth, to the incarnation of Christ, to the mechanics of atonement, to the future new earth. But we need to bring all of this high theology down to the listener's Tuesday morning commute.
The sources cite a very sobering statistic from the CDC. The average life expectancy in the United States right now is 77.5 years. If you break that down into weeks, it is a shockingly small number. Life is incredibly, undeniably short.
You are a breath on a cold winter morning. You appear, you are visible for a second, and then you vanish into the air.
And the text offers several highly actionable takeaways based on this stark reality. The first is a direct call to repent of functional atheism.
Which means what exactly, or what does that mean in practical terms for someone sitting at their desk at work?
It means repenting of living your daily life as if God does not sovereignly dictate every single heartbeat. You might profess a belief in God on Sunday, but functional atheism is the arrogance of assuming tomorrow is guaranteed on Monday. It is making your 5-year plans without considering providence.
We all do that, planning like we control the future.
We do. The sources challenge the reader to actively number their days, recognizing that pretending to have endless time is the root cause of much of our delayed obedience, our procrastination, and our intense anxiety over controlling the future.
The second major takeaway is about how we interact with the good, physical things in our lives. We need to hold earthly things with open hands.
Because life is fleeting, we must receive our daily work, our meals, and our relationships as callings and gifts from above, not as ultimate saviors. The text encourages you to eat your bread with joy, to love your spouse, and to work diligently at your job. But you must do so knowing these are unmerited temporary gifts from God's hand.
If you demand that your career provide you with a sense of eternal worth, or you demand that your spouse fix the void in your soul, you turn a good gift into a crushing outl. You ask the mist to be solid concrete, and it will break you.
That is completely true. The text also notes a very specific application regarding the practice of believers' baptism.
Yes, the sources note that believers' baptism functions as a highly public physical declaration. Going down into the water is a picture of dying to this passing, vaporous world. Coming up out of the water is a picture of being raised to a new, eternal life in Christ. It is an outward, physical sign of refusing to cling to the fleeting, fading things under the sun.
It is a profound, a truly beautiful picture of leaving the vapor behind.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, as you drive to work, or as you finish that treadmill run we talked about at the beginning. We talked earlier about the idea of a breath on a cold window pane. It appears for a second, it fogs up the glass, and then it evaporates.
It is just gone.
If your life is truly just a brief breath on a cold window pane, why do you spend so much energy fighting the wind, trying in vain to stop the evaporation, instead of deciding what precise shape you want that breath to leave on the glass before it inevitably fades?
That perspective changes absolutely everything about how you spend today.